The heat inside the aircraft hangar at Camp Lemonnier hit like a physical thing, thick and suffocating even with the massive bay doors rolled open to catch whatever breeze crawled off the Red Sea. Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez stood at parade rest near the sparring mats, her worn training shirt dark with sweat, watching as a pair of Djiboutian officers practiced joint manipulations with their American counterparts. The session was going well, controlled, technical, the kind of training that built muscle memory without the testosterone-fueled chaos that got people hurt. Then the two-star walked in. Major General Thomas Blackwood moved through the hangar like he owned the air itself, dress uniform crisp despite the heat, his aide trailing behind with a tablet and strained expression. Elena had seen his type before, a career built on staff positions and PowerPoint briefings, the kind of officer who'd done his time in Iraq during the surge, but mostly from behind a desk at division headquarters. He stopped at the edge of the mats, hands on his hips, watching the combatives demonstration with the appraising look of someone judging a county fair exhibit. "So, this is the joint training program," he announced to no one in particular, loud enough that everyone heard. His eyes swept the formation, lingering on the African officers in their mismatched uniforms, the Marines in their grappling shorts, and then stopped cold on Elena. His eyebrows went up. "Who's running this session?" "Staff Sergeant Martinez, sir," the base commander answered smoothly. "She's our lead combatives instructor for her." Blackwood's laugh was sharp, performative. "You've got a fragile girl running close-quarters combat training in front of our allies." He said it like a joke, but the kind of joke that demands everyone else laugh along. A few junior troops did, nervous titters that bounced off the corrugated metal walls. Several NCOs found their boots suddenly fascinating. Elena kept her face neutral, years of training smoothing over the hot spike of anger in her chest. "Yes, sir," she said, voice level and professional. Nothing more. What else could she say? That she'd cleared more rooms in Mosul than he'd probably seen in his career? That the last time someone called her fragile, she'd been holding pressure on his femoral artery with one hand while returning fire with the other? The general circled the mats like a predator assessing prey, his polished boots clicking on the concrete. "I'm sure you're very qualified," he said, drawing out the word like he was tasting something sour. "But we've got allied officers here, Marines, soldiers twice your size. How's that going to look when we're trying to demonstrate American military capability?" He gestured at the nearest Marine, a corn-fed kid from Iowa who probably benched twice his body weight. "No offense, Sergeant, but I could put you in my pocket." The silence that followed was excruciating. Elena felt every eye in the hangar boring into her, waiting for her response, watching to see if she'd crack. She swallowed hard and forced the corners of her mouth into something that might pass for a professional smile. "Understood, sir." Blackwood nodded, satisfied, and then dropped the hammer. "Tell you what, tomorrow, during the force protection exercise, why don't you demonstrate some of those takedowns? On me." He grinned at the assembled formation. "Just to prove this program isn't check-the-box fluff." "What do you say, Sergeant?" What could she say? "Yes, sir." That night, alone in her barracks room, Elena sat on the edge of her rack and methodically taped her knuckles, each wrap precise and tight. The old scar along her ribs caught the fluorescent light, a puckered line where a piece of rebar had torn through her kit during a building collapse in Mosul. She pressed her thumb against it absently, muscle memory from checking the damage years ago. The walls of her room were bare except for a single photograph. Her graduation from the 75th Ranger Regiment's combatives course, standing in a line of sweat-soaked soldiers, most of them men who towered over her. She remembered that day, remembered the instructor, a grizzled Special Forces sergeant, pulling her aside afterward. "You're not the biggest or the strongest," he told her. "So you need to be the smartest and the fastest." Every single time. She'd taken that lesson to heart through 3 deployments. Iraq first, attached to a special operations task force that didn't officially exist, clearing houses in Ramadi while most of her West Point classmates were sitting behind desks in the green zone. She remembered the weight of night vision goggles pulling on her neck, the grainy green world they revealed, the way sounds changed in narrow hallways when you were stacked up with your team, waiting for the breacher to blow the door. Syria came next, more shadows and fewer rules, chasing high-value targets through a landscape that looked like the moon had crashed to Earth. She learned to fight dirty there, learned that textbook techniques meant nothing when some desperate jihadi got inside your minimum distance with a knife. She still remembered the courtyard in Al-Hasaka, the insurgent who'd somehow survived the initial breach and came at her in that dusty space between buildings. He'd been bigger, stronger, fueled by religious fervor and crystal meth. She'd put him down with a throat strike and a knee dislocation that made her sick to think about later. But in the moment, it was just another problem that needed solving. The worst memory, though, the one that still woke her up at 3 a.m, was the MRAP that hit an IED outside Mosul. She'd been in the trail vehicle, watched the lead truck lift off the ground in a pillar of flame and smoke. By the time they'd pulled security and gotten to the wreckage, Corporal Davis was bleeding out from a severed femoral artery, his life pumping out onto the desert floor in rhythmic spurts. She'd held pressure on that wound for 23 minutes while they waited for the medevac, her hands cramping, Davis screaming, the smell of burning diesel and copper blood mixing in the superheated air. He'd lived. The surgeon at Landstuhl told her later that she'd save his life, that most people would have panicked or applied the tourniquet wrong. She just remembered being so tired afterward that she couldn't make her hands stop shaking. Now she was here, at a support base in Djibouti, teaching combatives to soldiers and Marines who thought she was fragile. She pulled open her wall locker and looked at the subdued patches folded in the bottom. The 75th Ranger Regiment scroll, the task force insignia she wasn't supposed to talk about, a JSOC challenge coin that weighed more than its size suggested. She ran her thumb over the coin's raised edges and then tucked everything back into her duffel. The general didn't need to know. None of them did. By breakfast, the story had spread. Elena walked into the dining facility and heard 2 Marines reenacting Blackwood's performance, one of them pitching his voice high and mincing across the floor. "I'm a fragile girl," he squeaked while his buddy doubled over laughing. They didn't notice Elena standing 3 tables away, didn't notice her students watching, learning what was and wasn't safe to challenge in this environment. The planning session for the force protection exercise was worse. The senior instructors gathered in a sweltering plywood office, maps and radio frequencies spread across a folding table. Master Sergeant Coleman, who ran the base security detachment, cleared his throat and avoided Elena's eyes. "Martinez, I'm thinking maybe you take a support role for this one. Help with the OPFOR coordination, maybe run communications. He gestured vaguely. Play better for the VIP, you know?" Elena studied the exercise layout, her eyes tracking the simulated hostage location, the approach routes, the fields of fire. "This blind spot," she said quietly, pointing to a corner of the compound near the fuel storage. "You've got no overlapping coverage here. If I was running a real assault, that's where I'd punch through." The room went quiet. Coleman leaned in, looking at the map, and his expression changed. "Shit, you're right." He looked up at her with something like respect. "When did you?" "Mosul, Ramadi, half a dozen other places." She kept her voice flat, professional. "It's the same mistake everyone makes. You focus on the obvious entry points and forget that real threats don't always come from where you expect." Later that day, the general materialized at the base gym, where Elena was supervising sparring sessions. He watched 2 soldiers grappling on the mats, his arms crossed, that same appraising expression on his face. When Elena moved to correct a private's form, Blackwood's voice boomed across the space. "Hey, go easy on her," he called to the private's partner, a stocky Marine who outweighed Elena by 100 pounds. "She looks like my daughter. Don't want anyone getting hurt." The laughter that followed felt like a threat. Elena felt her jaw tighten, felt the familiar anger rising in her chest, and forced it down. She caught the eye of Specialist Chun, a young woman from the motor pool who'd been watching the exchange with wide eyes. Chun was looking at Elena for cues, learning what was and wasn't worth fighting. Elena gave her the smallest shake of her head. "Not worth it. Pick your battles." But inside, she was counting down the hours until the exercise. The force protection drill kicked off at 0600, the base simulating a coordinated attack and hostage scenario. Elena had been assigned to the red cell, the role-playing aggressors, while some lieutenant fresh from Ranger School led the blue team response. She watched from the compound's outer perimeter as the exercise unfolded, noting the mistakes, the hesitations, the textbook movements that would get people killed in a real scenario. In the Tactical Operations Center, General Blackwood leaned over the radio console and the camera feeds, his voice crackling through the net. Let's make this look realistic, people. I need something good to brief back to the Pentagon. Loosen up those safety constraints. I don't want this looking scripted. On the ground, Elena's assigned partner, Staff Sergeant Kowalski from 2nd Battalion, was feeling the pressure. She watched him getting amped up, his movements getting rougher with the role players, pushing past the agreed-upon boundaries. When they reached the simulated hostage location, a Djiboutian officer playing a civilian misread his aggressive body language and genuinely fought back, turning the controlled scenario into chaos. Bodies crashed into metal equipment. Someone's helmet flew off. The safety officer started forward, but Kowalski had the allied officer in a sloppy headlock, cranking on it with too much force, while another role player tried to pull them apart. They were feet away from stacked ammunition crates, near forklifts and sharp edges, and nobody was listening to the index calls. Outstanding! Blackwood's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. Let's see what you've got. Elena made a decision. She moved fast, stepping between Kowalski and the Djiboutian officer, using a precise arm drag to break Kowalski's grip. When he spun toward her, aggression still burning in his eyes, she caught his wrist, redirected his momentum, and put him on the concrete with a clean hip throw that looked effortless. He landed flat, the air rushing out of his lungs, shock replacing the adrenaline. "Exercise is over," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the confusion. She helped the allied officer to his feet, checking him quickly for injuries, then extended a hand to Kowalski. "You good, Sergeant?" The compound went quiet. Through the speakers, Blackwood's irritated voice crackled across the space. "Well, that was anticlimactic. Martinez." She looked up at the TOC window, where she could see his silhouette. "Since you just demonstrated your famous moves on one of our own, how about a repeat performance? For morale. Come on up here." It wasn't a request. 20 minutes later, Elena stood in the main hangar, bare feet on the blue sparring mats, while the general strode toward her in his PT gear. Grinning like this was all a big joke. The entire base seemed to have materialized. Marines, soldiers, allied officers, contractors, everyone forming a loose semicircle around the mats. Someone had even set up a camera. A medic ran through the safety brief, while Elena kept her hands loose at her sides, breathing steady, centered. The general rolled his shoulders, still performing for the crowd. "Don't worry, Sergeant. I signed the waiver. And I promise not to sue if you accidentally hurt me." More laughter, but nervous now. Something in Elena's stillness was making people pay attention. "Sir," she said quietly, respectfully, "I'm going to demonstrate a basic rear naked choke. I'll apply pressure gradually. If at any point you want me to stop, tap my arm or the mat twice." "Understood. Yeah. He waved her off. "Let's do this." They squared off. Blackwood tried to use his size advantage immediately, muscling forward, reaching for her with big, looping movements that telegraphed his intentions from a mile away. Elena had seen this pattern 1,000 times. People who thought fighting was about strength, who'd never been in a real alley in Ramadi at 2 in the morning with someone trying to kill them. She moved like water, redirecting his force, off-balancing him with a simple ankle pick that he never saw coming. He stumbled forward, and she was on his back, seatbelt grip locked in, hooks sinking deep. The crowd pressed closer. Elena's right arm snaked around his neck, her left hand gripping her right bicep, the triangle closing with mechanical precision. At first, Blackwood kept grinning, playing to the crowd, making jokes about being in trouble now. But Elena knew the exact angle, the exact pressure on the carotid arteries. She'd put bigger men to sleep in less time, men who were trying to kill her, not men who thought this was a game. His breathing changed first, becoming labored. Then his knees dipped just slightly. The grin faltered. He reached up to her forearm, trying to pull it away, but Elena had the technique locked in. He wasn't moving it without proper training. His free hand slapped at her arm once, twice, then frantically pounded the mat. Okay, stop. Stop. Elena released instantly, unwrapping from his back and stepping away to a respectful distance as Blackwood dropped to his hands and knees, gasping, one hand at his throat. The hanger was dead silent except for his ragged breathing. The medic moved in to check him, but he waved her off, embarrassment and shock warring on his face as he climbed unsteadily to his feet. Into that silence, the base commander stepped forward, a quiet one-star named Castillo who'd actually bothered to read personnel files. "While we have everyone here," Castillo said, his voice carrying across the hangar, "I think it's worth mentioning that Staff Sergeant Martinez has 3 combat deployments. 2 to Iraq, 1 to Syria, all attached to Special Operations Task Forces. She's cleared more hostile structures than most of us have seen in training. In Mosul, she pulled a wounded ranger out of a collapsed building while taking sniper fire. She has an Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device, a Purple Heart, and more close-quarters combat experience than probably anyone else on this base." Every head turned to Elena, who stood with her hands clasped in front of her, expression neutral, while her face flushed red. Blackwood adjusted his collar, cleared his throat, and walked slowly back to the center of the mats. When he spoke, his voice had lost all its bluster. "Sergeant Martinez." He paused, working his jaw like he was testing if it still worked. "I underestimated you. That was wrong of me." He looked out at the assembled formation. "And that's why you don't judge a warrior by what you think they look like. I apologize. And thank you for not putting me to sleep on camera." A few uncertain laughs, but the mood had shifted. One of the Marines who'd mocked her at breakfast now looked at her with something like awe. Master Sergeant Coleman nodded slowly, a gesture of respect. The change didn't happen overnight, but it happened. The Marines who'd reenacted the fragile girl line now showed up early to her classes, asking technical questions, calling her Sergeant with a different inflection. Specialist Chun stayed late on the mats, working submissions until her GI was soaked through, and Elena quietly corrected her form, passing on the knowledge that had kept her alive. 3 days before he flew out, General Blackwood appeared at Elena's office. Not the TOC or the hangar, but the cramped plywood space where she did paperwork. No aide, no entourage, just a tired man in a wrinkled uniform. "I wanted to apologize properly," he said, standing in the doorway. "Not the public thing. That was for everyone else. This is for you." Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat heavily. "I did 4 deployments," Blackwood continued. "Baghdad during the surge, mostly. But I was on staff, running operations from the FOB. I saw combat, but not what you did." He gestured vaguely. "I read your file. Really read it. After." He paused. "How do you do it?" "Go from that to teaching boot privates how to throw a punch." Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. "Someone taught me," she finally said, "when I was that boot private who didn't know anything. They taught me, and it kept me alive, and now I teach others. That's the job." "Yeah." Blackwood nodded. "Yeah, I suppose it is." He stood, extended his hand. "You're a hell of a soldier, Martinez. I'm sorry I couldn't see that until you put me on my ass." She shook his hand. "Respectfully, sir, you saw what you expected to see. Most people do." After he left, Elena sat alone in her office, listening to the sounds of the base settling into evening. Generators humming, distant voices, the call to prayer drifting over from Djibouti City. Her service wouldn't make headlines, wouldn't be the subject of Hollywood movies. It was stitched into faded patches, old scars, and the way she automatically scanned every room she entered, marking exits and threats and safe positions. That night, she locked up the combatives' cage, the empty hangar echoing with the memory of the general's choked out "stop," and his later, quieter acknowledgement. The young Marines and soldiers who'd watched everything would remember this, would carry it forward, would maybe think twice before dismissing someone based on assumptions. Walking back to her barracks under the African stars, Elena thought about all the quiet professionals she'd served with, the ones who'd never been thanked on camera, whose names appeared in classified reports and nowhere else. The ones who did the work because it needed doing, not because it would be recognized. That was the real lesson, she thought. Not the choke, not the demonstration. Just the simple truth that the loudest voice in any room was rarely the most dangerous. And that out here, in the places where it actually mattered, the quiet professionals were the ones who kept everyone alive.